biofuels in Brazil, it's not only, deforestation is almost 20% of global emissions. So it's a big part of any global climate deal, how to deal with that. But then also the other side of this is the false solution. It reminds me that there's a Bay Area company who's trying to develop ethanol-based jet fuel. So it's not like they're just thinking cars, they're thinking of sustaining the global air transport system with sugarcane, and where is this going to come from? So it's not just about who owns these means of production. You see the pictures, it's about what are the means of production that are going to replace fossil fuels. That's one reason IHG has been involved in the technology transfer discussions. My colleague, just standing now, Alexis Halbert, distributed a few documents, one of which is a sort of innovators leader statement that we had as an input for really what the U.S. contribution should be to a technology cooperation outcome for Copenhagen. The Amazon also makes me think of the indigenous peoples who inhabit there and all the world's tropical forests. We work very closely with them, and you'll see on our website a new report forthcoming where we brought together a lot of the non-indigenous NGOs to support the implementation of the new UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in the discussions in Copenhagen. I think one positive development was that reference of the declaration was in there several times in the text. There's still discussion within the indigenous community, the indigenous caucus, how that's going to play out, how useful it's going to be. What we know is that it's important that it's in there.
The text of the accord.
Sorry?
The text of what?
In the red document, what do you call it? The red text as part of the Copenhagen outcome that did not get agreed to. In Obama's Copenhagen Accord, there's literally 2 sentences about red and about forest. No mention of rights, no mention about compensating developing countries. But again, that's kind of the point of what was wrong with the Copenhagen Accord. There was all this great work that came up out of the negotiating groups, big issues still to be resolved. But we wish that they hadn't supplanted that with this secret text that sort of was dropped out of the sky, and all countries were given 2 hours to either agree to adopt it or not. So we'll continue to follow that forward, but we have about 25 minutes left to open it up to question, comment, discussion. And all this is being filmed, so if anybody wants any part of it to not be filmed, then let us know. James.
So I'm curious about what's being batted around as far as future strategies. I was over there as well. I saw kind of some opportunity for actually a lot of what's represented here. California, Brazil, and youth support of that as climate leadership, especially with Governor Schwarzenegger putting forth a subnational conference here in California in 2010. But just want to see what else is being discussed, if there's more focus on the U.S. or on Mexico and COP16 or what you guys are hearing.
I have a couple quick thoughts on that. One is raising with our climate colleagues the whole theory of change about how you get a climate deal. What a lot of them have been operating by is you get the most progressive European countries and the most progressive countries from the global south, those that are being drowned by rising sea levels mainly, and that's how you're going to get the most progressive North-South alliance for a climate deal. That was the alliance that produced this accord, which wasn't that strong, wasn't just, wasn't ambitious, and didn't really get legally binding. So we're wondering, we need an honest assessment of that strategy. At the same time, the alternative strategy has been to unite behind the G77 plus China, because developing countries think largely they're going to get screwed out of the process, and the best strategy is to stay together in their big coalition and get as much as they can in terms of deep emission cuts and support from the north. So, but it's not clear how well that worked or what its future is going to be. So we feel like it's really a time for important reflection within the climate community to think about the way forward. On Mexico, definitely a big opportunity there. One big change in strategy we see is it's a real opportunity to change the conversation towards rural populations. And the justice issues that traditional farming, forest, fishing, and indigenous communities have. They just announced last Friday, it'll be in Cancun, which we're very comfortable with, having worked there in 2003 for the WTO mobilization and a lot of allies in the region. So we think that's a big opportunity for us.
Mexico City, it's Cancun.
It's not Mexico City, it's Cancun. So that's an opportunity for change strategy. And then again, back to home in the Senate bill, there was sort of a stealth strategy. Let's not talk about the international provisions in the current climate bill because we don't want to, expose that money might be going to poor countries. Well, that's all over Fox News now. And so now that the cat's out of the bag, I think there's got to be a vigorous defense of that money and a real promotion of the climate justice politics as part of the domestic debate.
So if I could take just a quick stab at that, is that okay, China, or okay. So the way we've been articulating the strategy is there's kind of 5 elements that we need for climate justice. We need a rights-based, justice-based approach to policy. That means we need to be crafting and advocating for the best policy we want. We need a multi-sectoral grassroots movement. We need leadership from communities on the front lines of the root causes of climate change. So those are the communities on the front. What has shifted in the last 5-7 years is that coal impacted, mountaintop removal impacted communities, refinery and power plant impacted communities are now calling their struggles climate justice, and not just environmental justice, not just public health or community health, but actually saying no, defending us is defending the planet, right? We need people power. We need to take direct action for climate justice, and we need to inoculate or defend the actual concept of climate justice from total co-optation, which is a lot of what we saw happening in Copenhagen and other places. We have people working in all those different places, and what we don't have is alignment. What we need is people willing to take action, accountable to communities on the front line as part of a multi-sectoral movement, driving a rights-based approach to policy. And our role in movement generation, and I think what we're trying to build, is the multi-sectoral, is the movement tier. We know that there are folks like IFG and IPS who are like super on top of the policy piece. And we try to, I try to know what's going on, but that's not my thing, right? And so to that end, we see the U.S. Social Forum as a really critical opportunity for pushing the ecological justice frame within social movement circles. We're really trying to target particularly organizing people who are organized in organizations that have been working together for many years but haven't taken on this struggle because they have skills and capacity and reach that the environmental movement hasn't been able to get to on the ground. And so U.S. Social Forum for us is a really big deal. Robust local work is a really big deal, and especially because of California. And then we're also looking at Bolivia as an opportunity. If we take advantage of the Bolivia moment as an opportunity to actually, on our own terms, define what we're going to fight for and what we want in Mexico, rather than getting there and struggling to figure that out, or being in that position where we're fully defensive, I think that can be really. I think that's actually going to be hugely helpful. Yeah, so those are just some of the things on the horizon for us. What we think strategically needs to happen. We could be wrong, but that's what we think.
So my name is Eleni Sotos. I'm with the Funders Work Group for Sustainable Production and Consumption. And the big elephant in the room that I still am wondering if anybody's really working on is the rapacious demand, mostly in the north, mostly in the United States, when we consume most of the world's resources. Has there been any conversation, when we talk about alternative technology, we talk about regulation on the international level, the federal level, the state level, but has anybody been addressing a real, from the consumer standpoint, of like this need to just have whatever we want, whenever we want it, we don't care where it comes from? I mean, I work on the sort of consumption side, but we are constantly struggling. Our economy is based on consumption. Our gross national product is based on how much we buy. So I'm just wondering, trying to think of like if anybody is working on that on the climate side.
I'm going to take a quick step. That is the biggest aha moment with the groups we work with, because we take people on these like retreats out into at the Occidental Arts and Ecology Center and like basically gloom and doom them for 3 days and then do strategy for another 3 days. And the thing about these organizations is there's suddenly this realization that the economic justice frame that we've been fighting for is the idea that poor people get to be part of the consumer culture at a scale that is unsustainable for anybody and not in any way the kind of justice that anybody really wants anyway. And it's sort of like, wow, okay, how do we engage that with our folks in a way that isn't also now saying, oh, just when you're getting close to getting something, how do we deal with the common but differentiated responsibility within our country? How do we apply that framework domestically? And that's been a big part of how we've been trying to think about it. And it's very challenging. It's like extremely like it's a hard thing for people to get around. Like one of the things that's hard for a lot of the groups is when we basically say we have to be willing to abandon resource-intensive industrial production, and that's been part of the left like it's like it actually doesn't matter who controls the means of production. You can't turn trees into stuff and expect to get away with it for very long, at that scale. And those are some of the challenging ideas I think that we've been struggling with those groups. Like, so people are trying to figure it out, Our take is it's overproduction for overconsumption, and I actually, it's true there's a rapacious demand, but we drive it for capital interest, right? So we want to focus on the production side so we don't get into the like, A, lifestyle change is going to make a difference problem, and B, that we end up in a blame the victim kind of framework.
Yes, I think it's important that we don't think of this as only an individual solution, because usually, actually, this is a discourse very common by large corporations that if you just change your light bulb, if it was like an individual problem only, because then what comes to that is like if all of us are guilty, that means that nobody's guilty, right? Mm-hmm. So we started to take the problem out of, the main question is who are the big polluters? All over the world, the car companies, the oil companies, large agricultural corporations. So we need to target, our fight against large polluters and keep showing and educating people about that. Otherwise, it will just means like, oh, all of us are guilty, so we are guilty if we take a more than 3-minute shower, while large agriculture uses most of our water anyway. So it's very important, I think, to do public education around this issue and really target who are the big polluters, and link that, of course, with, for instance, the economic crisis in the U.S. and all over the world. After that, what was one of the main measures all governments did here in Brazil, all over the world, was to try to save large car corporations, right? As if our economy depended on that. This was an economic model that was built over 50 years ago, so it was not too long ago, right? With Ford here in the U.S. that created this new system, this new economic system based on that. So if we look back, it shouldn't be difficult to think of another system, another economic system based on different type of demand, on public transportation, for instance. So anyway, I think it's we are so used to our lifestyle that it's difficult to think of anything different, but I think this is what the key issue is about.
I just want to take a moment to call attention to a report that I actually released in Copenhagen on this subject, that we see no possible mix of alternative energies, technologies that will sustain this whole industrial society without a crash conservation course right away. And the author of that is in this room right here, Jerry Mander. Want to say a word about it?
I was the editor.
Editor?
Alexis has 50 copies of it. It's called Searching for a Miracle. And it basically argues that that the industrial system can't survive this kind of crisis, and that alternative energy systems are not going to be able to make up for peak oil, for the depletion of fossil fuels, and that conservation is really, ultimately, conservation, consumption, and all those things need to be attacked. In fact, I wanted to ask a question. To what degree were people discussing in Copenhagen systemic change? Because I thought it was a farce watching Obama try to, and many of the other countries trying to argue for a climate agreement, at the same time keeping their other foot in the idea of expanding automobile production and housing starts and industrial production and so on, and that it's a conundrum that they all face that seems to me within, the growth capitalist framework is impossible to solve. And I understood that a lot of people in Copenhagen were addressing that systemic problem. Does anybody want to comment?
It was on the street, and and it was a little bit in the conference hall. Where you saw it was in, slogans posted all over town, and it said it was what the Climate Justice Action Group came up with, and it was system change, not climate change.
Yeah.
And it was something that Venezuelan President Chavez picked up and talked about in his address, and sort of giving legitimacy to that call from the street. President Bolivia Morales said the same thing. They were really the only two talking about systemic
Well,
change.
I didn't expect it from the governments, but I was just wondering if you heard it from the people.
It was definitely on the street and in the alternative
The governments
forums.
are faced with an impossible situation.
Yeah, serving two masters. There's a
We'll
good.
leave these booklets on the table if anybody wants.
IHG's Claire Greensfelder and I had a press conference releasing this in our other report. You can see it on our website also for a good synopsis of it. Claire?
Yeah, I was just going to say briefly, we did present that report in 3 or 4 venues, and in every place it then engaged in the conversation in what's called side events. A lot of these meetings have the policy negotiations, but there's a whole other parallel event that goes on both inside and outside, and in a number of different places where we raise this. There's a lot of resonance when you talk about it, but then no one, I think what you're pointing to, Jerry, is that the path through and reflection of that in the documents is not there. And so I think that's another thing that, Gopal, in terms of the Bolivian meeting, to take the moment to really solidify the strategic call from the global social movements that also recognizes, as you're doing in your local movement generation retreats, that this sustainability question and the resource use and for what, the basic incompatibility that Jerry's mentioning, has to be addressed. And there has to be, that's the other elephant, well, you raised it, Elaine, it is the elephant in the room. And I think it's one that we need to go forward really strong and get in those declarations so it becomes a talking point and moves into the policy debate.
China?
I had a quick comment and then just.
Oh, wait, one last thing. There was one other comment that Chavez made, which many of you probably heard, which was, if the climate were a bank, they would already have saved it. And that was, if you think about that, the $750 billion that came for that, and yet the call is for $100 billion a year starting in 2011. But our colleagues are saying it's going to cost at least $1 trillion for the kind of adaptation and mitigation, things that are going to need to be done if we really are serious about saving the planet. But no one ever talks about to what lifestyle. And that is the not the $1 million question, but maybe the $10,000 question.
I mean, I
There are 30 copies here, but we also have reports in the office if you don't get one. And the PDF is also available online, so you can download it. So everyone knows.
Victor, I just had a quick, we covered the Climate Forum 09 parallel conference to the Bella Center events. And there was a lot of rich material there, and you can go to Climate Forum 09 and read their declaration, which really puts the official declaration to shame.
Thank you. China?
I guess my comment is on this question of, do we target the corporations, which is where I've been for years, and versus cultural change or consumerism. Like, the older my son gets, I mean, the more I try to raise a child in our culture, the more I go to a both and, you know, approach to it, because I think the cultural change is what will enable people to actually take on corporations in a real way, and vice versa, or something like. It's just a very you know, and I think we're taking it on in different ways, but it's very both and. The very concrete question I had was, I know, Victor, you were talking before you came, and there was all these emails like, well, maybe if we won't have a whole agreement, we're going to have one on forests, and it will respect it. You know, we'll have this one thing. Is what you're saying that basically nothing except this accord came out of it? You know, in terms of some of these, you know, more discrete pieces like the stuff about forests, and kind of on the international level, how does it move forward? Like, everything just sits until the next COP, or?
What you have is, you know, first of all, it's a very complex and sprawling process with many different tracks of the discussions.
Right.
And it should be no surprise, because you're trying to decarbonize the global economy in a matter of decades. It's reorienting everybody's economy. So it's more complex than a WTO round of trade talks, I think. So what you have is, in all the different working groups, you have texts that have been elaborated, and there's things that have been agreed and things that haven't been agreed. And so you have a lot of brackets in those texts, which is where the decisions still need to be outstanding. So those things are still sort of there. They're available on the UNFCCC website for everybody to see. You know, what should have happened was been a recognition that this is how far we've come, and these are the big decisions still to take. And, you know, sorry, Copenhagen, but the legacy is going to be, we're going to continue this process. The next meeting is now set for Bonn, Germany, beginning at the end of May. That's because that's where the UNFCCC website secretary is based. And then end of November, for 2 weeks in Mexico, Cancun, is going to be the next conference of the parties, where they hope to culminate this and conclude it. So there will be meetings between there, where they don't know yet when.
But to be more specific, so it's not, there's no possibility to carve out pieces at a time and come to an international agreement on them. It's like sort of all or nothing.
Yeah, it's like they say in a WTO round, nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. Yeah.
Some things can be set aside, and we're like, okay, we've got consensus on this, or we think we'll get consensus on this, but the whole, it's a package deal.
And like I said, there's a lot that has been agreed, sort of, but those areas of big agreement that still are outstanding.
Okay. Can I just make a quick comment on what you were saying about the culture versus? I completely agree, and also, actually, I would argue that the best forms of resistance are one that define in concrete terms what we really, the cultural shift that we really want. So it's like the idea, I mean, one of my favorite examples is in an attempt to build the Thai Malaysia gas pipeline, they were going to put a pumping station in a rural fishing community that was primarily Muslim in Thailand, which is a predominantly Buddhist country, so they're a minority. They built a mosque right where the pumping station was supposed to go. And they said to the government, now you got to tear down our mosque. And it created, it's sort of like what we really need, what we really want, where we want it, as a form of resistance. So it's like a small scale of that is like you could think of critical mass that way. It's not that I think that convincing 350 million Americans to ride their bikes more is the solution, but actually taking that action in an organized way to define, to model what we really want is a solution. So I'm totally with you. I didn't want to sound like I was.
And I just want to say that I don't think it has to be either or.
Yeah.
So we need, public education, cultural change, lifestyle change. But if we only focus on that, we forget who are the big polluters.
So in the back, I know you've been waiting, and then here.
Two quick comments and then a question. Comment one is that in the U.S., if you look at the life cycle emissions of CO2, 2/3 under direct consumer control. So the idea that the elephant in the room idea is really a key issue, I think. And consumers have way more power than we think. 1/3 is from direct energy consumption, like fuel, cars, and planes. The other third is from the embodied energy and all the stuff that we buy. So changing consumer behavior is a critical piece when you think about it. And then amplifying on that, one of the best things is to not talk about the costs, but what are the benefits in terms of non-financial benefits. Higher quality of life, better community, better health, cleaner water, cleaner air. I mean, there's ways to quantify those in financial terms that will give us a lot more reason to actually really pursue those more effectively. Then the question is on the technology transfer aspect that you brought up, Victor. It's absolutely a crucial issue. And in that, the funding mechanism is probably the hardest part to answer. I mean, what are the thoughts on how that's going to work? And just to make a point, why are offsets, are they off the table, or is that a way to improve the good things about offsets that allow that money to be paid out in a way that those who are paying it get some kind of benefit in return?
Those are big questions. I don't know if I could answer within 1 minute. Do you want to say yours, and then I could try to combine the two, or talk afterwards?
Mine is kind of different. So, should I?
Because I know if it's hard to answer that. Well,
sure. My question is, you guys did a great job of explaining how the North isn't a homogenized group and how there are people that are disproportionately affected by climate change, which is the same as in the South, right? The people who are kind of going and doing the negotiations are representing those that are profiting off of the economic system that is currently in place. And I was kind of wondering if you felt like a grassroots presence from the South that maybe were in contradiction to people that were representing them, and maybe what you saw.
Absolutely. I mean, the social movements did not come in saying we want what our governments want. We're all there to pressure our governments to do the right thing. It is not my role or responsibility to try and convince the Association of Small Island States to have better targets. Right? That's not my role. My role is to break my foot off in the. Well, anyway, my role is to put pressure on the United States, and so and just very, very much so. And I think there's a general recognition that the G77 is a strategic formation that right now is trying to get some basic, but it includes Saudi Arabia, and it's a mixed bag, right? And what we're trying to avoid is the United States basically being able to blame the quote unquote new polluters for that's not appropriate. So yeah, there is a lot.
On finance, just to take a quick hit at it, the three big issues I think of as the three S's. It's scale of finance, sources, where's the money coming from, and structure of governance. On the structure, the U.S. is still resisting having a financial mechanism that is accountable to the Conference of the Parties of the Convention, which we think is ridiculous, right? Climate funds should be governed by climate authorities, not the World Bank, which is still polluting at 27-1 fossil fuels over renewables. So that's still a fight that we have to fight here at home. On the sources, there seems to be gathering momentum now about a financial transactions tax and a bank tax. Pelosi has talked about this. Obama is talking about one now today, but we haven't connected that to the climate finance community. So that's another big opportunity. And then I could talk about it, the other stuff later, and Gopal I know has a lot to say about offsets.